You're very welcome to the next episode in our Work From Anywhere series. Today we're going to be talking about navigating work from anywhere risks, looking at it from a tax and legal perspective and how you can use technology to manage those risks with Doug Bach, Ursula Dyer-Leparoli, Sarah Briggs and David Levitt. Don't forget as well, in the meantime, we've got our Work From Anywhere white paper, so please take a look at our website and fill in the survey. We'll be sharing the insights on that white paper in January 2022. And next week, we're going to be speaking about international remote working. Is it the fad or is it the future? With Mark Gilbreth, Natalia Comas, and Chris Dyer. For now, enjoy episode 17. Hello, everyone. You are welcome to today's episode, the 17th episode in our Work From Anywhere series. Couple of statistics just to kind of set us off on today's episode. According to a recent report by KPMG Global Mobility, 58% of organizations do not currently rely on talent mobility technology to administer various aspects of their program. So just under 60% do not even use that technology side. It looks like Excel and Google Sheets is about the most of technology that can be used. So I think there's plenty of opportunity there and food for thought on how global mobility programs can leverage the power of technology, which will be a key part of today's episode. Another two statistics, this time coming from a BCG survey in the last week, surveyed almost 10,000 employees in digital roles around the world. And this kind of ties in with the great talent migration that's happening now at the moment. Almost 40% of employees working in digital fields are actively job hunting, number one. And number two, nearly 75% are expecting to leave their current role in the future. So in this war for digital talent, especially in the technology engineering roles, Work From Anywhere is no doubt going to come into the equation as one of the key employee benefits. And that will be the topic of today's discussion while we bring on our guests. Unfortunately, for the first in our series, Doug is not able to make today's talk. However, we've got two great representatives who will be able to talk about how Doug and the team implemented Work From Anywhere technology and compliance in Group 1. And with that in mind, I wouldn't mind bringing on our wonderful speakers. We're going to have David, Sarah, and Ursula. First of all, you're all very welcome to today's episode. Thank you very much for being part of today's episode. One of the things I would just like to say before we go into the introductions is today we've got a fantastic group of tax and compliance and technology experts. If you have specific questions around tax, I would ask that if we could avoid very specific detailed questions about one country or another. The reason is, if you take the US, there's over 50,000 tax jurisdictions. There's no tax expert in the world that knows every single tax jurisdiction. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of discussion here to be talked about the strategy and the tactics and the technology side. But at the same time, please, all of you feel free, all of the audience, tell us where you're dialing in from and also what questions that you might have for our great group of speakers. But with that in mind, David, would love if you could kick us off, please. Tell us more about yourself and Global Tax Network.
Thanks so much, John, and thanks for inviting me to be here today. So David Levitt, I'm a managing director and also lead the business traveler and remote worker solution here at Global Tax Network. We are a boutique mobility tax business specializing in income tax, equity, business travelers, remote work for any corporates or individuals moving globally. So 20 years experience in this field, last 10 really sort of focused on business travelers, which then pivoted in the last sort of 2 years to that acceleration of remote work. So it's been a fascinating journey, and I'm delighted to be here today.
Great, thank you very much, David. I think that what we're seeing more and more is just having good tax advisors, but have that multi-jurisdictional knowledge is so crucial. And of course, with the Global Tax Network, that's certainly what you guys offer. Sarah, tell us more about tracker software technologies and yourself and your own journey.
Yeah, of course. So thanks for having us this afternoon. So I'm Sarah Briggs. I look after the operations and implementations teams at Tracker Software Technologies. And so I joined the team here in April. And prior to that, I'd spent the last sort of 15 years working in and leading the global mobility focused team for various global mobility operations roles. And if I go way back prior to that, then my love of travel and where I think all this comes from is I used to work for Thomas Cook Holidays and now defunct and overseas rep role. So this kind of ties together all of those elements for me. So I was so excited to join the team.
Great. Well, look, thanks very much for all of you for being part of it, and especially you, Ursula. You're dialing in from Australia. Tell us more about yourself and the KPMG Global Mobility team.
Sure. So in 2005, I came to Australia from the States and fell in love with Sydney. And now I'm a dual citizen. So I've been with KPMG in our global mobility practice for that whole time. I came as a student and just kind of stayed. Having challenges myself and being an expat myself can definitely understand the experience. So we in Australia at KPMG have a unique model where we've used technology to stop doing offshoring to India. So definitely tech is close to my heart and what makes us different in the market.
Great. Thanks very much, Ursula, for coming on board. I think one of the first questions is when we hear often, and it's a question I would like to ask all of you, is it's a real big discussion point. Work from anywhere, is it a myth or is it reality? I'd love to get all your takes on that. David, what's your take?
I would say it's a reality. I think it was there to begin with. Before the pre-pandemic, I think the numbers were probably small in many businesses. GTN, for example, is actually fully remote. So we actually have some offices around the US. I should have said actually, John, I am actually in the US. So a bit like Ursula, I've transplanted myself to another country. So I'm actually in Raleigh, but there we go. But we are remote working, and I think that's accelerated over the last 18 months. But what I think has happened is this. Initially, it was the pandemic. It was a reaction. It was everyone just be safe. Try and look after yourselves. And now it's a reality. It's companies are now starting to think, well, how do we get our arms around this? Where are our risks? And I know we're focused on tax today, and that's obviously a really exciting topic to talk about, but we will get into the detail of that, I think, and unpack that a bit.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, what do you think? I mean, work from anywhere, is it a myth or is it a reality?
I mean, I have to agree with you, David. It's definitely a reality. At Tracker Software, we're also a remote work company. All of us work remotely. Again, we have office spaces that we can go into. Like I think many organisations at the moment, we're actively recruiting and we're find the talent pool that we need. We need to expand our recruitment horizons to enable really remote work wherever we can support that from. I think there is some myths around the ability that anybody can just work from anywhere and truly be compliant. I think that's where the myth sits, but I think the reality is that people are working from anywhere, and we're seeing that continuing, and we're going to see that continue to grow with just all the technology that's coming on board that supports all of those things.
Very, very, very important point. I think as well, differentiating between, let's say, a permanent hire, somebody looking to hire abroad versus somebody looking to remote work temporarily abroad. Of course, the differentiation there as well. Ursula, what's your take on that?
Oh, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's a reality in that, if we did one of those LinkedIn polls and we asked people how many took their laptop on their last holiday, I expect that 50% of them would probably say, yes, I did do that. So work from anywhere is really a formalization of those kind of arrangements and what people were doing anyway, and bringing that into the future and the flexible way that we're working. But then on the other side, if you asked a construction worker, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I can't work from anywhere. And you often hear in the media, talk about the two-speed economy. And I think advancing in this space, we can't forget those that can't work from home and what that means for them. So it's a bit of both.
I think it's a crucial point that recognizing the privilege that we all have to be able to remote work, those of us that can. I think it's a tricky nut to crack, isn't it? It really is. I'm certainly, when I'm speaking to people, one of the things I try and say is, work from anywhere. Exactly. Like I think the message from all of you is that it is a myth and it is reality. In other words, if somebody says they want to go work from North Korea for a couple of months, I'm sorry, we can't get a visa. There's probably a PE risk, and there's the data isn't safe. I'm sorry, it's not going to work. So I think at the same time, then, so if people are looking to temporarily work remotely abroad, there's certainly some potential around there, and that's the exciting bit, that the technology aspect that you guys are going to be speaking about. Coming back to Ursula as well, one of the things that we're seeing is trying to find a balance between, let's say, the risks on the one hand and then the employee benefit on the other. I mean, how flexible work and kind of work from anywhere is considered and is becoming more and more considered a key employee benefit. Are you seeing that from the clients you're speaking to, Ursula? How do you see that?
Yeah, definitely. So your question being, how do you balance the risk and the benefits?
Yeah.
I'd say the biggest risk is doing nothing or saying no. So I was talking to a girlfriend the other night at a dinner, and she works at a university, and she was saying that their university has made the decision to just say no. You can't work anywhere else but here. Then on the other hand, I was approached by someone who wanted advice from another university in Australia, and they've got this really flexible policy that says you can work up to 60 days anywhere you want in the world. There's no approval process, and it's just kind of go do what you like. So look, I don't know that I would take the extreme approach of kind of 60 days, go where you like, because I think that kind of exposes yourself, your company, to a bit of risk that you need to control. Not just tax, but immigration, health and safety, privacy, cyber. Like there's a lot of things going on that you need to manage. So yeah, I think the biggest risk is not having a position at all or saying no. I think you need to look at your culture and your talent management system and your strategy and figure out how far you can push it. Because if you say no, then you're going to be losing out on the talent pool.
Yeah, great point. So I guess coming back to that then, David, the importance of being proactive. I guess one of the things we're also hearing is OECD relaxed a lot of their, the rules for the last 2 years of the pandemic, but obviously that's really going to change in the next year. So the importance of being proactive, like Ursula says, and getting ahead of the curve with regards to getting the work finder policy in place. But when you're looking and speaking to your clients, David, what do you get, or the sense from trying to manage and balance the risks with the employee benefit?
Yeah, I mean, it's, Ursula and I have got similar backgrounds, so we're always going to say, do the right thing, be compliant, make sure you're managing the statutory requirements of that country. I think that has to be balanced with commercial risk. And that's where, as you quite eloquently said, some companies are looking at 60 days. I've seen some down to 10 days. There was one the other week, 182. I mean, that's really, really pushing.
Oh, that's crazy.
I agree. And
most I heard was, I think, HubSpot doing 90 days. I think they were using that, their executive recruitment, putting that on LinkedIn, saying, look, you can work from anywhere. As long as you have a work permit, you work there for 90 days. That's I think the most aggressive I heard, yeah.
And I think the interesting thing for me about that is that there's a lot of headlines out there. There's a lot of companies that are saying, come and join us, work from anywhere. But when you get into the detail, as we'll do with the Groupon example, companies are putting guardrails around. It's to only certain jurisdictions. They're denying entry to working remotely in some areas. They'll look at a certain number of days per year in that. So it's not quite as free and as loose as maybe the media is presenting it. And I think they're, again, Ursula touched on the points. It's not just tax and payroll. It's immigration. It's duty of care. It's technology licensing. I mean, can you use your laptop in that other country? Does your client want you to have data?
That's a good one.
Sitting in another country, which they don't want to operate in? Can you license your software to work in that country? All those
absolutely. Absolutely fair point. Even just the technology licensing, I haven't even heard that one before. Yeah, very, very valid point. I have to give a shout out here to my co-founder Donal. He has the greatest risk of doing. He loves that comment that came through. You were saying there from Ursula. He's actually, believe it or not, he's in a bus on the way down from Dublin to Limerick, where we're going to catch up for a pint in a couple of hours' time. He's been over in Sydney for the last year, so the first time that we've caught up face to face since we started the business. So looking forward to that later. Donald, safe trip down. We'll have a nice pint of Guinness waiting for you when you arrive. But I guess, Sarah, is then from the technology side, one of the things, balancing on the one hand the risk and the quantification of the risk and dealing with it with the employee benefit. How do you see that from a technology side? And I know we'll get into more detail with the Groupon side of it. I'm looking forward to hearing about that in a bit. But just on that point, I wonder, what's your take?
I mean, for me, the technology is designed to support the policy. So your policy of what you're going to come out with, be that 60 days, 182 days, 10 days, whatever you agree is something that is approvable for your employees, your technology should then support being able to push them through that process really quickly. Now, whether that's, like you said, Elshin, no one approves it, they just pop it in, it's automatically approved by the system, and then that system is connected to notify everybody that needs to know that has an impact to that. If that's 182 days, that's probably going to be quite a lot of people in the organisation that need to be aware when you think of benefits, corporate tax, payroll, maybe their line manager, their senior manager, External vendors, your tax partner might well need to know that. They need to support them for their tax compliance, their immigration vendor to validate that truly that right to work that they believe they have does enable them to do their existing role from that destination they're going to. But whatever's in your policy that we can then push through, the technology should support you to just really not have to really look in detail at those people. What you then want to spend your SME's time on is the ones that are truly outside of policy, exceptional. Are you going to grant those exceptions? Policies are there because they're the same for everybody, but people are never the same as each other. So you want to be able to use the technology to really sort out, where do I need to focus my time? Do I need to focus it on the 80% of people that are doing 10 days in jurisdictions where they're not creating any risk for the company, they've got the right to work, these people we're just going to push through the system, track where they are, we've got our duty of care to them, we've notified all of our teams and we'll manage it. And then we can focus on that 20% where we maybe don't want to say a flat no, but we do want to assess the risk and make a conscious decision of how do we enable these people to go and really make a qualified decision on whether we're going to knowingly be compliant with this particular trip. So I think that's where your technology has to sit. It's got to connect everybody, and it's got to enable you to make this process as easy as possible for as many people as possible.
I think part of that, one of the points you mentioned there is, what it shows is that with Work From Anywhere, because it's so many more people requesting it, it is so crucial to have that technology component right. But what's also fascinating around that is it also changes a little bit the role of whoever's looking after the mobility function. If you put in business travel or global mobility, wherever it is, or a mix or both, because there's so many more people impacted by it, it's almost like global mobility have to develop these kind of marketing muscles to get the message out there, to make those people aware, and to have the technology in place that will give the kind of low-hanging fruit yes or no answer for the 80%, so that, like you say, you focus on the 20% that are more of a higher risk. But I think going through all the risks, Ursula and David, that both of you mentioned, I mean, we mentioned in previous episodes as well, but it's almost head-melting, the amount of risk, which is why, Ursula, I loved, there was a wonderful overview you shared on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago on kind of the Work From Anywhere, creating a globally agile workforce. And you talked about, I love this message of bringing order out of complexity. Can you tease that out for us? Tell us more about that framework and how you approached it in KPMG.
Yeah, look, I think when you get a complex problem, it can blow your mind, or you can have a process for sorting it out. And I think, as Sarah was saying, this is where the technology is so important. So, we've got kind of this framework where we approach a company when they're talking about doing it. And we've actually, tried it on ourselves as we launched our own policy to say, okay, you've got all these things, but in what order should they be done? What's the most relevant? And like Sarah said, where can you find some flexibility to maybe have some gray area where you might actually make some people decisions and not just kind of say robot says no. So I think that's really the essence of it, is us creating that framework for people to be able to say, okay, we're ready. What do we need to think about? And then once we're live, and well, how do we do our change management? How do we actually release these comms? It's important for talent management that the public know that we have a policy. So how do we manage that? And then, when it's time to actually doing the work, who do we provide access to the system? Is it like Sarah said, you let anybody go in and just kind of put it in and say, nah, oops, I'm done. That's great. See you later. Or do you provide it to line managers? And I think some of the questions, like I was talking about, where it's not really a reality for everyone, if you're not going to have certain people that can actually work from home in your big organization, I think David and Sarah are lucky that everybody can do it at where they work. But, we've got a mailroom. The mailroom guy can't work from anywhere.
Yeah,
so we need to be able to restrict the access to that tool so that, you don't have those painful conversations that take up 100% of your time where you're explaining to someone, no, you can't actually do this. So yeah, it's really coming up with a process behind the tech, because you can't have a good tech tool without a process behind it.
No, a complete valid point. So putting the effort in as a team, cross-functionally, to come up with a good policy, like weighing the risks of the benefits and the days, what you're going to do, how you're going to offer it and roll it out, but then the technology piece and then the advisors, etc., along with that. But getting that kind of fun part of the equation right, obviously critical. Just curious as well, so what is the policy in KPMG? Are you allowed to work remotely abroad or not, or for how long, or what's the policy?
It's an evolving beast, but right now it's 30 days. 30 days is where we've landed in KPMG in Australia. of where you can go. As you guys mentioned, it's not everybody. So we're not actually offering it to brand new staff. You actually need to pass probation first. And I think we'll get on to later kind of where we think the sticky points are with this. But
okay.
it's I think you have to accept that it's not for everyone. It's not for the part-time person. It's not for the casual labor. So we've had to kind of draw those distinctions up front, and then create the matrix behind the scenes to be able to create those easy yes, no answers.
Yeah, no, 100%. David, I'm curious your thoughts just following on from that. I mean, one of the things that come along here is you also mentioned a great point that it's not available for everyone. You've got to target it, obviously, in every organization, for most organizations in the case. Like, for example, one of the risks that pop out there, could you run into discrimination risk or whatnot? Could you be sued for not people being allowed to access or what? I don't know. But that ties into kind of a broader conversation as to what are the biggest risks and pain points from work from anywhere. Can you maybe tease that one out? Because you mentioned some of them earlier on, but what are the biggest, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I just it's very interesting listening to Ursula, because it's just fascinating to hear how we've all got very similar approaches to this, and to some extent they're all scalable. So, for example, we look at policy and process and technology, say, to enable that, and then you've got the compliance piece around it. And I think the challenge, the pain points really of most businesses that we work with are looking at probably 5 areas. So, what's the historic risk? Where to start? What point do you say I need to do this? Is it from January this year? Do I go back to 2019? What's our risk, and what do I need to do about that? That's the first thing. So this is all the operational risk side of it, really. Then the resourcing. How do I do this internally? Am I doing all this? Do I need a technology? I haven't got enough staff as it is. How do I get someone to look after this process? Then you look at your policy, and as Ursula was saying, we focus very heavily on that policy piece. That it's not just tax, there's all these other areas which we'll touch on in a moment. Then you're looking at the governance, the process internally. What does that actually look like? Who's in control of this? Some companies set up a steering committee, some might have one owner. Who's really going to put their hand up to own this? It's mobility has, in a way, it's landed in their laps, not necessarily they want to own it. It's a bit like business travel. It was one of those areas which nobody really wanted to own. So you tend to find it being sort of sitting between a couple of departments overall. I think remote work has expanded that greatly, because now you're looking at the entire workforce. It's not just groups. And the fifth area, because I did say 5, is how do you ensure that what you've approved, so you've got the request process, the approval process, how do you ensure that what's been approved has actually happened and that person has returned from their temporary remote work? What's your data management, your management information internally to ensure that you're operating correctly, and there's any strategic issues that you might want to look at? For example, is everybody requesting to work from Rio because they march, or is it a popular destination that you may want to look at the risks around that scenario? So they're the operational risks. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's some great points there, David. And maybe Ursula, just coming back to that point, and one of the points that David mentioned as well, there's there's massive risks that are potentially mentioned there, and just how you tackle it. I'm curious on the KPMG side, do you see, for example, is permanent establishment coming up as the biggest risk, or is it more the data side, or is it visa, or does it depend? I mean, does it depend? I guess it depends on the company a little bit, but are you seeing one or two that come up as the biggest ones, I wonder?
Oh, look, I think it's it depends on who you're asking.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So if you ask payroll, then there might be, where are these people at? If you ask the CEO or the CFO, then it's definitely going to be, permanent establishment issues. And I think that's a really hot trending topic in this space at the moment. But if you ask one of the leaders of one of the business units, something that I struggle with is the time difference. Like, how am I going to actually have these people sitting in different areas of the world? How am I going to give them tech support if their laptop breaks? So if their laptop breaks and we have a guy who was in the UK for family reasons during the pandemic. And at some point he couldn't do any more updates to his laptop and he couldn't get in. What do you do then? So there's that. Yeah. And that's just from a tech side. That's not even trying to, do client work or anything. I think another one of the risks is going back to what David said with the duty of care. And that's what, your HR type people would be concerned about. So as the pandemic was kicking off, I had an employee that we just sent on a short-term secondment to Japan. And, our our prime minister said, you need to come home now. And he was like, well, how do I get home? How do I organize all of this? No, so that was just, one person. Imagine if you've now enabled everyone to work from wherever they want to. And yes, you might not have any legal risks because you've said that you're on your own or whatever, but you really, you want to take care of your people. And so how do you do that if there's something going on? And then another thing, my last thing is training the new ones. How do you it's great if someone's been working for 10 years, but how do you actually train up people who are brand new?
Yeah. For me, fundamental questions there. In many ways, it kind of ties even to the broader remote work side of it as well, dealing with that synchronous, asynchronous communication, the impact on culture and training and stuff like that, I guess. Then if you look at then, Sarah, and again, we'll be talking about recruitment in a bit, but how does big picture tracker software technology and solutions like that fit into this kind of whole compliance puzzle? Can you kind of give us a bit more of a light and shed some more light into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So tracker software technology initially did start out as a business traveler compliance and tracking tool. And this was in a world pre-COVID, if anyone can remember that world. There's always been these requirements to ensure that you should be compliant when you travel. And that was really where the company started from. And then, like so many, we've evolved kind of quite fast through COVID. We've had to add in all of the COVID compliance requirements specifically for travel, all of the temporary restrictions and allowances that were put in place by various countries for people that were just displaced during the initial phases of the pandemic. And then really out of that, we've got the remote worker tracking compliance, which has become just a type of work travel that's being offered much more commonplace by many companies.
So I think that's an important one, Sarah. So it's like a specific tool designed for remote workers, let's say.
Yeah, I think your technology has to be able to support remote workers. And when you look at that, you're looking at all of the areas that they need to be compliant within. Tax is a big one, and I'm certainly not the person on this call qualified to talk about tax. But who in your organization is it? Are you taking that information externally? How are you making sure that you're mapping that in your system? Is that internal information, and how are you tracking that down and getting that in your system so that that's available for everybody to know that that's what's going to need it to be compliant? But then we have immigration requirements. What are you supporting for that person? If many behind the headlines of many of these companies, we are seeing them say you need the right to work. You can go and work remotely from anywhere if you have the legal right to work from there. Who's checking and auditing that, right? Who's making sure that you've got a copy of that on your system? Your technology should be enabling you to do that. It should be taking all of these different strands and kind of looping them all together to say, hey, here's all the information that we want to have to support this traveller. Because ultimately, I think most organisations do come from a place of wanting to say yes. So they're trying to align what is it that we need to have to say yes, and where's going to be our line to say no. And that's where technology can do that really well, because it just works on logic. So whatever we're putting into place, like Ursula, you talked about kind of from the chaos trying to get some sort of order from it. That's what this will enable you to do. So can you quantify your risks in each of the areas that you've got risk in? And do you want to come up with a score that says if somebody is within this number, we'll approve them. If they're going to exceed this number, we want to look at them differently. So that's where I think technology can fit in the piece. It can take all of that and just put it into a system.
Yeah.
The communication still has to be personal, right? Technology doesn't replace the communication, but it does enable it to happen in a way that's consistent to everybody by looking at risks in a consistent manner.
Good one. I'm just here as well. I see Jonathan is sharing here just a website to learn more about Global Tracker. By the way, for all of the resources that we talk about on this episode or anything that's mentioned in the show notes that we publish on Monday, we'll put anything that's mentioned by the speakers here, for example, so that everyone has access. We'll have the KPMG report there, the BCG report, and link to tracker software technologies, anything like that as well. Ursula, any other examples of technology tools? I mean, obviously you offer it as well in KPMG, I guess. Yes. Any other ones that we're thinking about that need to be mentioned?
Oh, look, I think Sarah's talked about a lot, but maybe I'll add, and we've got a risk rating for our remote workforce tech tool as well. But at the top of our tool is the cost. So we've got a cost projection. So again, going into that approval CFO type mindset, no one's going to allow something to happen if it's going to cost too much. It's kind of understanding, what's the cost of this? In addition to that, we've got the individual income tax alongside the corporate tax. And we've got the social taxes. So I brought this up in a couple of other conversations I've been having is, you might fall out of having a requirement to report and actually pay anything for someone in their home country when they go live abroad. But do you want to do that? Is it possible for you to help them and put it somewhere else where they might want it? But having a position around that social tax is really important.
So just reiterating that, it's really critical. So we're talking about tools here. These are tools that we're talking about here that that look after the individual income tax, the corporation tax P risk, that deal with Social Security, that deal with the employment law, the visa and immigration, also in the likes of Europe, with Posted Workers Directive. All of these aspects, your head would be melted from just going through what are the different risks. But it just goes to show the powerful technology out there that deals with all of these risks, brings it into one place, and helps people to make the decision. I think, again, it's just making people aware of these fantastic tools is absolutely critical.
So, John, just another thing is you can do all this stuff at the beginning to assign a risk rating, but you've also got to be able to, as we've been talking about, track what's actually going on. So we've got some tools in order to, and they work with apps. It's this KPMG Link Go platform that we've got that allows people to actually say where they're at. It's particularly important in regions like Europe, perhaps less in Australia, but it's and definitely so in the US with all the different states trying to get a piece of pie. But it's important that you make it easy for the employees to be able to actually communicate with you where they're at so that you can remain compliant.
Yeah, great point on the communication side. And I would say as well to any of the audience members as well, if you have recommendations of technology you'd like to mention as well, please feel free in the comments or share your experience of it as well. David, anything else that we forgot? We've covered a lot there in those last two answers. Any other ones that you'd mention or be aware of? Or for example, even on the visa side as well or whatnot? I don't know. Is anything else jumping out that comes to mind? If not, don't worry. We'll go on to the next question.
Yeah, no, just very quickly. And I think there's what I don't want to do is scare your audience into thinking. I mean, we work with Sarah and her team. So and having been in the Big Four, we talk about technology all the time. That can scare some companies, right? Because they're not scaled. They don't want that. They're a small company. They might be 100 employees, that sort of size. So my advice would be there's a lot of technology out there. So do look at what your budget is and what you want for your budget. Look what you have already, because sometimes you might have a system already that does some of this and some of these elements already. So you might be looking for a request process, an approval process.
Yeah.
What you're layering on is the technical bit. So as Ursula was saying, you're then looking at tax and payroll, immigration, duty of care, posted worker. These are all the sort of technical aspects. There's lots of technologies which have those sort of already immigration, and there's a great one. A lot of law firms have the immigration aspect already. Your company, the companies may be using that already, so they might not need to look for that additional technology. So I think it's a case of there's a lot out there. Look what fits your budget. Look at what you can create as a sort of an ecosystem kind of approach. You can look at APIs linking data into, that's how we're working with different partners as well. So different models. You've got your all end-to-end at one end, and then you've got your sort of more bespoke modules that are speaking to each other at the other end. So
wonderful points. And I would say as well, I'll be definitely badgering all three of you for a Work From Anywhere white paper to get your input on that and how you see the technology piece. We will be addressing that as a section of our Work From Anywhere white paper release in January, just sharing some of the lessons from the technology piece and what people are doing and what are the challenges and whatnot. So very, very helpful advice there. Sarah as well. I mean, when you talk about picking out technology, David mentioned some of them, like for example, your budget and looking at what you need and whatnot. But what are the key considerations when picking out technology in the compliance side of Work From Anywhere? I mean, where should somebody start?
Yeah, like a big question, right? I think determining what you need it for. So David, I think you touched on this already. It should be relatively easy to use for what you need it to do. So when we're looking at that, I think we're looking at what's your policy and how do you want to implement that internally? Can it talk to everybody it needs to in your organisation? Is it also going to be informative to the individual that's making this request? So when you're particularly US domestic, does the person actually know that what they're requesting is potentially going to give them a higher tax cost than they've got in their current home country? You want your technology to make sure that everybody is informed. Technology should be available to everybody that needs it. They need to have that information. So making sure that it's designed to support everybody with the messages that you want to give to them is really important. I think then it's also that our technology is designed on alerting people. So here's what this is going to mean, so that decisions can then be made from it. Technology doesn't have to make the decisions for you, but it can do that if that's what you want to enable it to do. You also want to think about who else does it need to connect with. Does it need to be interconnected with your tax provider? Should it be interconnected with your travel management company, with your duty of care provider, whatever that needs to look like? Make sure those interactions can happen to give you that solution. And then what about all of those different sort of internal stakeholders? Where are they in this process? If you want to accept this person's request to go and work remotely across the state border in the US, but that's going to mean payroll have to set up the community safety payroll withholdings in Oregon or something that's really a one-off that nobody else in your organization has. Are they involved? Are they aware? Have they been involved in the beginning of this process? So I think you want to always look at what you want as your end result and then work backwards from there to make sure that your technology is going to deliver that for you. It's got to be flexible, it's got to be easy, and it's got to be something that can incorporate everybody that needs to be involved in the process.
I get you. I mean, I'm just curious as well. If, for example, let's say tracker software, I'm curious, David, and Sarah, to just tease out, for example, how you guys rolled it out in Groupon. I mean, how much of an effort is it to roll something like this technology out? Is it a massive effort? Is it a long, big change management process? Or is it something that can be done in a few weeks? Or how can you just talk to us more about like a real example of Groupon? How was it rolled out? How did you get there? And, what was the experience from it?
Yeah, Sarah, just like I go first. So I start with a bit of history, and then we can go into the actual what happened, because it's these things do take time, and historically, it was always a bit more around business travel. So we started talking to them 2019 about business travel. Overnight, that everything the plug was pulled on that, and then it pivoted into remote work, and it really did stem from. And I'm speaking. You got to pretend I'm Doug at this point, so I'm trying to be Doug. I'm not as good looking as him, but he's there. So it was very much around managing their risk, the quantity of requests they were getting. So at the start, it was very much we've got people working everywhere. To Ursula's point, this is a service industry, right? It's a technology company, so they have people able to work in different locations. How do we get our arms around that? How do we manage that risk? So putting some parameters around that. Then moving into, we want to encourage this with our staff going forwards, but we don't have resources. It goes back to those pain points. We don't have the resources to actually look after this. How can technology enable us to manage a process through an request and approval system that then manages risk, alerts us to the risk, but can we automate the approval process? So the employee demand was high. So when we started this process, I won't go into all the ins and outs. It took a little while to get there, just internally, just because it's all the stakeholders globally that need to be involved. We started the implementation in July. It went live about 2 weeks ago. There's delays, and it's not around technology delays. It's policy, it's work council, it's communications. The change management side of this can take.
Who's involved in that, Dave? What stakeholders are involved? Obviously cross-functional. You've got HR, global mobility, tax and legal, business travel. What are the other stakeholders that are involved? I guess that people need to consider.
Yeah, good question. And I think a lot of this actually, again, builds on the business traveler experience. So it's building on creating that, if you want for a better phrase, steering committee of the different functions internally. Corporate tax, immigration or legal could be the same. Mobility, HR operations, a really important part there. Travel managers. Again, I know that sounds, but again, they might be heavily involved in the travel process. Are they allowing to be booking travel internally? What systems do they have in place already? So it's all what I found over the years of doing this. It's often companies haven't been through that sort of whiteboarding exercise in each of those departments to sort of say, how does it impact us, and where's the connectivity to ultimately define and design a process and a policy, and then how do we use technology to support all that? I've given you a very high-level overview, but that is what Groupon went through with that group. We had weekly calls with both technology implementation and also just going through the policy and the process internally.
I'm sure. Fascinating. It's less the technology is the issue. It's more actually how you have to reconfigure your operations to try and be able to implement the technology, to be able to, well, deal with the problem, I guess, because like you say, it touches off so many different departments. Absolutely
John, can I add one more department?
Go for it.
And I think that's ITS. So
Yeah.
we had a lady who needed to go back to China. This was pre-COVID. And we, when working with our ITS group and understanding the restrictions of the internet in China, we actually had to send her with a different laptop. So I think, you know, having this policy, you need to integrate even ITS into the conversations.
Yeah, with some examples as well. For example, people looking to go to, you know, work remotely for a few months in Cuba, but the problem is the network was not considered safe or secure enough there, so they weren't allowed to go there. So yeah, it's really, really tricky. So many different angles. But again, it's the beauty of getting good technology to help address it. What about Sarah? Can you tell us from the Tracker software side and the team? I mean, how did you look at this? Obviously, yeah, a big implementation. Very, very important one. And the fact you've gone live 2 weeks ago, congratulations with it. Obviously a big milestone. What else can you add to us to give us a bit of color as to how you looked at it there and how you rolled it out?
Yeah, and I would say once you get to the implementation phase, you do get down in the weeds, and it's really common that the policy you started with maybe slightly changes course. You know, I think as you talked about, you're going to still find out some of those sort of key pain points or areas where it's a little bit squeaky at the moment, and that might continue to change. So we kind of look at really inputs and outputs, right? That's really what the technology is. What data are we bringing in to start with? So then we're looking at making sure we can get the employee data in the system, that we've got the right information about these employees to be able to alert correctly on what the compliance risks are going to be. Another big stream that we spent quite a bit of time in with Groupon was their approval process. So it was really important for them that every stakeholder that needed to be aware of that particular request was able to see and make an approval of it. And quite a bit of detail in who's going to approve this first, who does it need to go to before it even goes to the next level, so that we make sure that we use these people's times appropriately. And I'm going to call out one other key stakeholder that I think really came out is the line manager. That's the first line of approval in most of the policies that I've seen. If your line manager doesn't approve for you to go and do your role overseas, then that request is not going to go anywhere. It's really important that it still works for the business.
So how does it work like that from the approval side? I'm trying to get my head around this. So you have a line manager as the first level of approval, and then I guess I've no idea, depending on the cost or the risk, it goes higher up the chain, I guess. So the longer they go abroad, or if they're in, for example, a sales generating role or a senior leadership role where there could be a PE risk, that it'll go higher and higher up the chain, I guess. Is that how it works? Or
yeah, so you can, the way that we structure it is the approvals can be based on what's considered the level of risk. So if someone's going for less than 30 days to a low risk country, it might just be approved by their line manager and then maybe their manager's manager, just to ensure that there's some consistency in there. If it's something where there's going to be a corporate tax risk, it's going to go to their corporate tax team, maybe their corporate legal team. If it's going to exceed a threshold for their benefits enrollment, their benefits team need to be in place. So I think as you look at where is the threshold for each of those departments of what's agreed to be acceptable or not, if it's going to be within a risk area, they might want to approve it. If it's going to exceed a risk area, it might be that it's just an auto denial on there. There might be certain countries that if someone requests to go to, the company's not prepared to support the risk of permanent establishment there, or whatever that happens to be.
But then, for example, once it gets through the approval, it goes to like a case file where it goes to, for example, the key decision-making department, which might be global mobility, and then global mobility decides to go, okay, we'll look at ourselves internally and go yes, no, or else we'll go to external advisors, and then you can still keep track of the case file, I'm guessing, to be able to see what's going on, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll have the request would be in there and everything would be tracked on what's been requested, where is it in that approval process, who's next in that approval process and maybe hasn't yet approved it. Is that because they're just not got to it yet, or is that because there's a reason here that they want to be looking at it in a bit more detail that needs to then be discussed with that broader group?
Fascinating. Another one for you, Ursula. I'm just thinking from technology. One of the things that some people can find confusing or tricky is that, some risks, like, for example, individual tax residency, depends on the individual, what country they're tax resident in and how long they're going for example, the nature of their work, that can trigger the risk. Whereas other risks, like, for example, PE risk, are much more dependent on the role. There are other factors as well, but they're dependent on the type of role, the seniority, or the sales generating, dealing with that kind of cross matrix of different risks. Is that really tricky to handle from policy making and technology side, or how does that work?
Look, our software allows you to enter in the type of role the individual has. And it kind of weeds out some of those things that are very easy. And then you can actually spend the time and energy on the roles that are more significant. And, if an auditor comes to you or someone who's very junior, you don't really need to potentially be sweating about PE risk. So you might set it up with the bands within the company. And I think someone was saying before, you need to integrate it into what you already have. So it's not like saying this is a standalone thing. You need to find ways to say, okay, we have bands within our company. This is how we do it. Or we have levels, if an associate wants to go, sure, great. If a manager wants to go, let's spend a little bit more time there. So it's integrating it into your SAP systems to understand how you can make those decisions. I just also wanted to call out one thing with the approvals process and the workflow. And we can see organizations creating these beautiful systems or outsourcing things, but it's how it integrates with everything at your company. So if I'm requesting to go work from anywhere, I want to do it tomorrow. I don't want to be hearing about how, it's with so-and-so for an approval and we must wait and then it goes to this person. I'm getting agitated and I'm starting to think where I can actually go work and do it from anywhere. So I think it's important to understand, how do you integrate that workflow from whatever tool you get with your regular workflow for your day job so that, there's no delays and the person doesn't get frustrated.
Yeah, very, very. I think it is. That frustration is also tricky as well. Maybe from a technology perspective, more of an open question, but let's say balancing like the risk of the compliance side, but also the risk that an employee might leave and the fact that they could leave and which employees do you offer. So I guess integrating that into this is obviously a critical part of it. I presume that can be brought into the technology side of it as well.
Yeah,
but
we've
it's
got
really
APIs
tricky
within our tool to be able to communicate with other systems. So I think you were talking about talking to relocation providers and how do you kick off the process if you're going to support someone. I think having those connections with other systems is really important.
Okay, one other question for you. So, from an Australian perspective, what countries are really risky? Do you see pop up again and again as particularly risky ones from the Australian perspective for work from anywhere?
Oh, look, I think we're an island, and when people talk about the pandemic and work from anywhere, I don't think that all the countries are issues, but I think I've mentioned some, and I don't think it's Australian specific. I think you've got to understand, like you said, the Cuba and the Chinas, you got to understand the infrastructures and the places where you're allowing people to go. As we're opening up in Australia from the pandemic and from our lockdown, we've got really close ties with the ASPAC region. So, you can now go back and forth from Singapore without having to quarantine. You might, next we've got Korea and Japan in the queue. So, I think we'll focus on this ASPAC region first and then set our sights further afield.
Go from there. Yeah, absolutely. And again, talking about the biggest risks, David, the London Executive Conference I was at in London. It was the first trip actually post-COVID. I was at that event at the end of September, and the biggest risk that came up was PE risk. Can you come up as like the biggest pain point? Can you tell us more about what particular countries are quite strict on that, as well as any strategies that can be used to minimize that, be it from technology or otherwise?
Yeah, no, good. It is a good question, and I think the first thing to sort of say is that with the PE risk, we tend to, and I think Ursula will agree with this, there's a lot of work done up front before, you have to understand the corporate structure. You just can't, you don't just sort of implement with a, hey, where are you present? You've got to work out where there is existing PE, where there's establishments and entities globally. As I said before, some companies have really restricted where that PE risk sits. So they're only allowing people to go to those countries. The PE risk itself, look at it from a sort of, there's sort of two areas to look at it. There's the global OECD model, which is very much in the treaties between countries, if there is a treaty. But that model is very much looking at place of operation. Has that person got an office, a business card? It's not so much a tick box exercise. Everyone's slightly different. What actually constitutes a PE? India can be particularly tricky. You can have a fixed base as well as a personal service PE. So you've got to again look at the data and what people are doing and how long they're there for to establish that. Throw in then 50 states in the US and nexus issues, and you've got quite a good, amount of risk there to really review. And nexus again is based on presence, not just presence of an operation, but of an individual. It could be the volume of sales. It could be the amount of sales, which creates an actual risk for you as an entity in that other jurisdiction. So it's, as well as immigration, I'd say up front, they're the two biggies that you really need to make sure you're getting right. You're dragging your company into a country or a state in which you are not registered. And that's where the corporate guys tend to get.
It sounds like the States, I mean, the message coming back again and again is the States is very high risk for working remotely and not declaring it. I mean, they check you so strictly on the entry and the visa side of it. You know, you do not want to lie to the authorities there. You never want to lie anyway, but it's certainly not in the US. But also the fact that 50,000 tax jurisdictions in the US, lots of complexity from the administration side, managing that side of it. Yeah, it's very, very tricky. I'd like to ask you, Sarah, as well, you know, how do you see that from dealing with the administrative side, but also the leading companies? What are the leading companies in this space doing? I know we spoke about Groupon. Any other good nuggets that you've seen from the implementations that you guys have done?
Yeah, do you know, I think the good companies in this space are really educating themselves and deciding what is acceptable to us, right? Those headlines that we've seen of 90 days from anywhere, behind all of those, then whenever you look behind, there's nearly always a policy that has some form of, and here's what's acceptable within that. So I think the good ones are actually kind of doing their research, getting all of those experts together to say, what are we prepared to bear as a risk for the company? Are we only going to allow people to work where we've already got permanent establishment? That's it. That's our list of where you can work remotely from. Are we prepared to bear risk? What does that look like? So I think the good companies here are actually getting all of that data together and then launching the policy, and they're talking to their employees and they're explaining to employees, hey, we want to give you this benefit. It's not completely open because of these reasons, because this is what it could mean. So here's what we want to allow you to do. Within that, you have the ability to go and do what you want to. So I think the ones that are doing a good job are really getting educated, and they're communicating that with their employees so that they understand exactly what is and really isn't potentially within that policy, so they know how to operate that work from anywhere ability.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. I was coming toward the end of today's episode. I'd like to kind of ask the last question. First of all, please feel free to add anything else that we might have addressed during it you'd like to bring up. Otherwise, I'd like to ask you all, starting with you, Ursula, you know, you can work from anywhere in the world. Where would it be and why?
Well, having not been able to leave Fortress Australia for the past 2 years, I think it would be great to go spend some time with my family and friends in the US and work there for a bit. I think my role as a leader and with my clients, it's really a face-to-face kind of gig. So I don't think that I, you know, for a long period of time would like to work from afar. And I also like to have a bit of separation from work and play. So I think I'll keep my favorite holiday destination is just that.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a hidden gem. No, that's fair enough. What about you, David?
Just before I go into that, the last thing I was going to say, just very quickly, just literally a minute, is sometimes there's a sense that we are fear mongering, right? We're sort of making this out to be a bigger issue than it actually is, and I don't think that's the case. I think if you speak to each of those departments we were talking about, they are worried, in their own respective ways. Tax authorities, just looking at tax, audits. That's what they'll be looking at. They'll audit the company. That's where the risk is. So it's getting this right is really important. You know, fear those audits and people being stopped and at the borders, etc. That's all I wanted to say on that. In terms of where to go, I was very lucky enough to get back to the UK just before this latest variant was mentioned. The two countries I love, South Africa and India, just absolutely amazing. Great food, the scenery, just everything. If I can get back to one of those soon, that would be superb.
Love it. India, beautiful food as well. Incredible food. Last time I was there. And poor South Africa, I feel sorry. A lot of people, I've heard of a few remote workers that have planned to go work in like the Cape Town, obviously, but now that's been put on hold for a little bit, hopefully for not too long. What about you, Sarah?
Well, being based in the southeast of the UK, for anyone else that's in this area with the weather we've had in the last sort of week or so, I think I would just go anywhere that was warm and sunny right now. We've had lots of storms, so really anywhere warm and sunny, anywhere in the southern hemisphere, I'll be there.
I don't blame you. Listen, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, David, Sarah, and Ursula, for coming on board today. Really enjoyable episode. Lots of insights. Tax doesn't have to be that boring. You can have great speakers like yourselves that bring it to life. But I like how you've all kind of knitted it with, on the one hand, yes, here's the risk. But as you said before, David, it's not necessarily about the fear mongering. It's also looking at it as the opportunity and what is actually, what is possible. And reflecting back on it, it is a reality. If you do it right, there's a way to do it. There's a way to target. And, like you mentioned as well, Sarah, there's a way to use technology and outside of it, and as did you, Ursula. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on board today. Really enjoyable episode. And as I said to everyone else, all the audience, we've got a work on your white paper. Take a look at that on the website. And we've also got next week's episode you can tune into. So thank you very much, all of you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.